framework and between SSR as conflict prevention and SSR as post-conflict reconstruction. Actually, the two are quite substantially different things. They should be joined, but in fact, that relationship has been deeply contested at the level of the UN. It has very different implications in terms of governance, in terms of what should be done with particular types of governments, and so on. And this was something that was actually acknowledged in the discussions leading to the AU draft. But the good thing is that even though the discussion seems to suggest that there are potential conflicts between the AU approach and the SADC approach, I do know there's almost a love affair between the AU and ECOWAS. You get a lot of very positive references within the AU to what ECOWAS is doing, particularly the ECOWAS conflict prevention framework and so on. So it's quite easy, I think, to align, the initiatives from the two sides. But the question that I probably wanted to visit most, and which I think we should have taken independently on board, is the extremely intriguing response by Tom about whether, in fact, SSR can be distilled into policy and whether it actually makes sense. Now, I cannot guess what George meant when he used the term postmodern. But if he did mean it in the sense that I think, and which I'll try to explain in a moment, then I would imagine that even though I highly value Tom's intervention as a reality check from somebody who's been in administration, in the civil service, inside government, and so on, which is not an advantage that we all enjoy, I would say at the same time that your response is almost reflexively modernist. Therefore, it seems to me to misalign with the postmodern, presumably, diagnosis that George is proposing. That's point number one. Point number two, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Point number two is that, in reality, though, the way the SSR a lot of the time hits the pavement is not inconsistent with the routines of the established routines of national governmental management, administration, and so on. A lot of this is actually taking the form, really, of sensible, regular defense and security reviews, which is an established tradition in the Western countries, and we know which, institutional instrumentalities are involved in those processes, and so on. And the real problem about the time with SSR, among the many problems, is that it promises extensively more than it ever gets around to delivering. All the nostrums about comprehensiveness and this and that are quickly lost in translation when it comes to reality on the ground and the actual dynamics of implementation. So it means that it's probably not as misaligned with your conception of governmental process and structure as one might think. Now, I would also say that the reason there is that SSR is postmodernist in diagnosis, entirely modernist in implementation. Okay, SSR is snake oil. It's pseudoscience. It's Reaganomics. But I do think, though, that going back to George's presumed allusion to postmodernism, security today is a profoundly postmodernist problem. We've seen security undergo a paradigmatic and philosophical transformation. It's become increasingly broad, all-encompassing, and traditionalists, I suspect like yourself, would say that it's altogether too diffuse, and I agree. At the same time, it's become deeply contested, as everybody has said repeatedly, But the reality on the ground, most importantly, it's also increasingly and irreversibly decentered. You know, people, the IDS has this research program talking about multi-level governance of security. Security globally, nationally, locally has become deeply decentered. And a lot of it has been captured by instruments and entities other than national governments. And I would suggest to you that this is irreversible. That global security institutions and national security institutions are in irreversible and fundamental and irreversible flux and cannot be caged back into that neatly delineated modernist box called national government, which is implementing authoritarian institutions. And the problem with SSR is that the diagnosis recognizes this, but the solutions and the implementation on the ground, reflective of this whole state building rhetoric, is profoundly, deeply modernist. So, I'm not in entire despair that SSR is in every sense on the wrong track. Diagnostically, it does have elements of truth building into it. It doesn't have the requisite elements of groundedness and verification, and certainly it lacks research and all of those tools that would make it relevant on the ground. But diagnostically, I think it starts on the assumption that security now is the business of many bodies, traditional as well as non-traditional. At the same time, of course, you know, let's not mystify national governments. All of these national governments are not disembodied entities. They are particular confluences and aggregations of specific interests. And that's where the contestation comes about. You know, I have no doubt that African governments, in spite of their allegedly big security capacity, can actually protect everybody. But they choose not to. Okay? They choose not to. In that sense, SSR is actually beside the point. It's a problem of political will and a problem of governance. So what we're seeing when we talk about the AU policy, when we discuss it with different audiences, is deeply divergent responses. You know, even among government, but certainly civil society, and so on and so forth. So if the problem we have is a postmodernist one, the solution cannot possibly be modernist. It also has to be postmodernist. Thank you.